And now, live from England, bringing you news and analysis that you won't find on the corporate and government mainstream media. It's the WideShut Webcast.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the show here on Resistance Radio. I'm your host Keelan Balderson, coming to you from the rainy shed of truth today. You can probably hear it in the background, I don't know, but it's kind of chucking it down here. Not many updates recently on the website, been dealing with some other issues, we'll leave it at that. But as always, you can check out all of my stuff at wideshut.co.uk. And for Mr. Brit's articles and info about the network, etc., it's resistradio.com. Now, before we get into this week's headlines, I just want to share an interesting little observation I made while playing a video game. Because it seems to me, this counterculture that we're a part of, this alternative to the mainstream, you know, call it what you want, I personally think the truth movement label's kind of worn itself a bit thin, but point is, I think video games are often a bit more receptive to some of the alternative views out there than, you know, often TV or film is. They're often less restricted than what you might see on TV. One example of this that I found quite interesting was in the game Grand Theft Auto: The Lost and Damned. I don't know if anyone's played it. It's the expansion to number 4. I think it's number 4. But one of the missions, you play this biker gang, a member of a biker gang, and one of the missions was to go into an airport and blow up a helicopter so it looked like terrorists did it, which I thought was a nice touch there. You're basically working for this corrupt politician, and he wants you to kill this other politician who's arriving in a helicopter, but you got to make it look like a false. You got to make it look like terrorists did it, which, you know, is quite interesting. The meme kind of being picked up there in popular culture.
I'm not going to insult your intelligence by pretending to be a good guy. I'm a politician. I'm a cynic. I'm very needy. I need people to like me. I need people to like me so that they elect me. I need people to elect me so that I feel marginally less bad about myself when I stare into the mirror. That being said, I try to do a good deed here and there.
Democracy's a beautiful thing.
Personally, I prefer a benign dictatorship without the pretense of choice. But let's leave the political discussion, shall we?
Yes, let's.
Unfortunately, an awful man has ensured that my chance of being re-elected is pretty much zero.
Why? Blackmail?
Not exactly. I need his money, and he hasn't died.
What? You want me to kill your father?
No, that's disgusting. How could you suggest such a thing? My father died years ago, thank God. No, my uncle. That sanctimonious do-gooder controls the family trust.
Whoa. That's heavy, man.
Yes. So is being arrested for drug running and spending the next 30 years in prison. You and your little gang, I mean.
I see. You make a wonderful politician.
I know. Now, you've got to get the old goat today. Make it spectacular. Make it appear as though it's a terrorist act. That'll do wonders for my campaign in all sorts of ways. Levis will give you a package on the way out.
Right.
It seems the meme of false flag terror is permeating into other areas. You know, you see it in films and TV shows and stuff. And obviously it's been there before. I mean, you could probably find hundreds of films before 9/11 and games and things that had stories involving false flags or whatever. But I just thought that was something that was interesting to share. I mean, the whole game has themes of political corruption, characters making side comments about the banks. You know, if you're walking about, you can hear homeless men screaming about aliens coming and things like that.
Reptilians is taking over. Pass it on.
It's a pretty damn fun game. All of the GTA games are good, I think. I mean, look at the graphics. Look at the detail. They're basically recreating a whole living, breathing New York City. And you can run around and do what the fuck you want in it. And whether you think these games, you know, should exist or not, because they're evil and violent or whatever, you can't deny the time and effort and skill involved in creating something like that. You know, it used to be 2 blocks hitting a square ball. Now it's almost real. I think that's got to count for something. Whether it means machines are taking over or whatever, you know, you can go down that route. And like I say, you're going to get those people that are going to be like, oh, it's evil, it's teaching kids to steal cars and stuff. No. What's teaching kids to steal cars and shoot people is our fucked up, unequal society. That's causing kids to steal cars and shoot people, not video games. Perhaps if some of those kids were indoors playing video games, they wouldn't be out causing crime. And yeah, it's an adult-themed game, but I didn't know that, you know, we're all Puritans all of a sudden. What's wrong with a bit of adult entertainment? Just because some idiot gives their kid a violent video game, does that mean responsible, intelligent people shouldn't be allowed to play them? Because you see a lot of these politicians and whatnot come out and speak out against these games. There's huge campaigns and you know, it's quite crazy. It's kind of like the same thing when, you know, like you get horror films and, you know, someone's murdered somebody and they go through their horror film collection. Like, oh, you know, it must be the horror films that did it. There's something a bit deeper to society's problems than the entertainment people choose to play or watch or whatever. A lot of the time you end up promoting games like this by speaking out against them. The only reason I watched the film Cannibal Holocaust when I was a kid was because it was banned in over 30 countries. Ooh. You end up promoting it. It's like reverse psychology to kids. So, I'm not anti-video game. I'm not anti-Hollywood necessarily, unless there's a lot of propaganda in a film. I'm not anti-TV, unless all you do is watch TV. Some people are a little too hardcore in their trutherism. You know, everything's Illuminati. Well, not everything's Illuminati. It's almost like saying you can't be creative because the Illuminati will get you or whatever. I read long books as well, folks, but I also like to speed around fake cities with a control pad. You know, I also like getting really high and watching movies. We can't read tragedy and hope every day, you know. I don't think entertainment's an inherent evil. I mean, when cavemen were like writing on their walls in their caves, were there other cavemen saying, "Oh, look, you can't read this cave drawing, it's Illuminati"? It's natural. It's fun to want to tell stories. It's natural to want to have fun. The problem comes when you watch 10 hours of TV a day and let it warp your worldview, or parents that, you know, bring their kids home from the state indoctrination centres at school and then place them in front of the television or the PlayStation or whatever. Like anything, it's moderation. There's nothing wrong with entertainment. Sometimes I think some people in this alternative movement tend to be a little self-righteous in the way they kind of act. Oh, what you watching that for? Because it's fun. It's all right to watch things that are fun, as long as you're not, you know, being brainwashed by it, and you actually do look into politics and the world and things. Then what the hell's wrong with watching something on television or playing a game or whatever? So yeah, GTA: The Lost and Damned, definitely worth playing if you're into that sort of thing. All sorts of little nuances that poke fun at the mainstream. You know, they have talk radio shows in the vehicles in the game that basically mock the left-right paradigm. You know, you have the right-wing station and the liberal station, and they're all just taking the piss out of each other.
The #1 conservative talk show in America. He's America's anchorman, the conservative captain of the good ship Freedom Isn't Free, proving we can shout down any dissenting voices. It's the Richard Bastian Show.
I think more and more people need to stop breastfeeding in public.
Absolutely! Breasts are filthy. Cover them up, okay? Don't make me pull out my boot knife and give you a mastectomy.
America is too concerned with birth control. We need to be making babies. We need to catch up with the Chinese.
I'm with you. We've got to monitor people's email. We got to outlaw all the wrong religions, okay? Because that way we can finally be free in this country.
This is the continued pussification of America. It's not okay for men to be hugging each other and crying and talking about their feelings.
You know what? I disagree. I say feel, but feel with your fists, all right? Right there, the hammers that God gave you on the end of your arms, okay? Are you with me, Bastion's buddies?
And now, here's the man himself, Richard Bastian.
It's not saying that we should be doing these things. It's mocking society. They have billboards in there for a beer called Pissweiser that has a woman deep-throating it. That's funny, because in real life we do have absurd beer commercials. We do exploit women. We do have corrupt politicians and things like that. They just ramp it up a little bit to make it humorous. And for those of us that aren't control freaks, we find satire entertaining. And there's nothing wrong with that. Games I'm not a massive fan of are some of the propagandist war games. I guess things like Call of Duty and all that kind of stuff. I covered it a little while ago, but Blackwater, the private security firm in Iraq, they're releasing a video game. And I think you start to cross the line at that point when kids are playing war games one year, and then the next year they end up in Afghanistan or wherever, killing real people with the same Xbox control pad. Then it stops being fun. And that's not just a rumour, by the way. I know people that have been in tanks and things in the army, and some of their controllers are Xbox replicas. That's what they use. There was actually an Army Jobs advert on Channel 4 that showed somebody using a Xbox control pad. I guess that was a selling point of joining the army. It's just like playing the Xbox, apart from you're killing real people this time. So if you want to get up in arms about video games causing kids to kill people, don't focus on satire like GTA, that I think actually does have some interesting social commentary about society. How about you look at the war simulators that are actually priming kids when they join the army and use the same control pads to kill people? That's quite freaky. There are a lot of video games that have these conspiracy themes in them, that have the odd political reference in them. Another interesting game that I played years ago is one called Deuce X, and it actually came out in 2000, and it begins with a terrorist attack on New York, but this is pre-9/11. And in the game they talk about FEMA, they talk about the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers in the game, and basically it's a story about a virus that gets released by some international terrorists or something. This is what I wrote about it. I did an article about it years ago now, but at the game's conclusion, you have three choices to make. You either join the Illuminati New World Order guys and control the world with them. You team up with some advanced technology firms and control the world via security, much like in today's Big Brother state. And the final option is to destroy technology and send the world back to the Dark Ages. So that's that game. But anyway, this isn't the gaming show. We're going to get into the EU, because obviously that's the big news since my last show. David Cameron's veto of the new EU treaty. And this has got massive hype in the mainstream media. But I think it's important for everybody just to step back a bit and put it all into context. Here are some simple facts about what's going on right now. Britain is still in the EU. We still have no sovereignty, and the country is still run by bankers. No matter how it's spun, just keep all that in mind, because in my opinion, it's more like a giant PR stunt than anything else, and it's playing in to the left-right paradigm. Everyone's getting sucked into it now. But what did he actually veto? Well, like I say, he didn't veto the EU. He didn't give people a referendum, as would happen in a real democracy. All he's done is vetoed the rescue plan that was led by Germany and France. And basically what that means is the City of London, the private financial district at the heart of a lot of the world's problems right now, will not have to adhere to some of the stipulations in this treaty. That's all it is. That's all he's done. He's just given the bankers free rein to continue doing what they do. Angela Merkel, I've got a quote here from one of the articles. Britain was never in the euro anyway, and they always had an opt-out. We always had this understanding. It won't deter Europe on other issues. Our laws are still made in Brussels. We're still paying millions to the superstate each day. Businesses trading in Europe still have to adhere to the EU rules. We're still going to be bombing countries with NATO. The only difference is 23 members of the EU have decided to have an extra treaty on top of the Lisbon Treaty, which involves a few banking regulations and things like that. But it's become a big PR stunt because we now have the quote Eurosceptics praising Cameron, thinking he stood up to the EU, that he's put Britain's interest first, which is complete rubbish. How is protecting the private bankers in the city in the best interest of the people? It doesn't really make any sense. But it keeps those Tory nationalists and, you know, the average person out there that wants out the EU, they think this is a win, you know, when it doesn't really mean much. On the other side, you have the pro-EU left-wingers saying we're all isolationists and that Cameron is taking us backwards, not forwards, which again is stupid because, as I say, it's not changed the Lisbon Treaty. We're still in Europe at this stage. But they kind of have this idea that it's all stuffy old men who you know, want the great British Empire. And then you have slightly more intelligent left-wingers that are pointing out the elephant in the living room, that Cameron is bought and paid for by the city, and that's why he's basically protected them from these EU regulations. But these people still love the EU. And then, of course, we have Clegg. You know, it's given Clegg the chance to act like he actually has his own ideas and that he opposes Cameron on something. You know, they've been finding it hard to have a debate on anything because they seem to agree on everything. So this gives them a little bit of a false left-right, you know, a false left-right paradigm to play into. Oh, I'm pro-EU. What's this guy doing? And we're seeing that in the debates on TV now and stuff. It's all, you know, the debates it's limited. It falls within, are you a lefty that wants to be in Europe? Are you this backward conservative? It's stupid. They never get to the core issues. Personally, I come from an ideology of freedom, so I don't want to be ruled by an unelected superstate of bankers and IMF and whatever in Europe. But I also don't want to be ruled by bankers in the City of London either. You know, none of this is benefiting us. And how will it affect us? Well, we still have a national debt of 4.8 trillion, which is growing exponentially each year. We still have private bankers gambling in the city. We still have the fractional reserve ratio. We still have the government borrowing money as a debt to fund itself. We still have lobbyists in the pocket of government. Hence the veto in the first place, because Cameron's bought and paid for. We're all still screwed. At no point have the people of Europe or anywhere else been considered. We're irrelevant to this. The Eurozone is screwed because they're being, everyone's being forced into the sinking ship of debt and austerity, and we're still screwed because we were screwed anyway. It's just men in suits making decisions for bankers. And in that context, I also think there could be a bigger picture to it all as to why the city doesn't want to be involved. On top of the obvious reasons, because they want to keep making money. But look at the Anglo-American establishment. Look at Wall Street and the City of London, where most of this financial fraud and gambling actually takes place. Look at Obama visiting Britain earlier in the year, where he claimed it's still America and Britain, and under his breath, and some of our allies in Europe, continuing to lead the international order. That video is up on my YouTube. Notice how he was making that statement in Britain, not in Brussels. The Anglo-American Empire is still king of the West. They're still the ones in control. And that's not being nationalist. I wish we weren't ruled by these people, but we are. But think about it, it's always America and Britain and Israel that push the hardest for war. It's always America and Britain, Wall Street, City of London, that are dominating banking and business. They're globalists, of course, but as long as they're at the helm of the global system. As Max Kaiser said on his RT interview, MF Global, AIG, all the scams went through London. It's the private casino of the bankers. This is where they operate. They've got banks from all over the world in that small area in London. And in many ways, I think the EU was traditionally a tool of those bankers, a tool of the mega corporations. And if it's failing, like it is, and it's not going to remain beneficial to them, and people are introducing regulations and stuff, the bankers aren't going to lock themselves into that, are they? You think the City of London is going to bow down to regulations posed by Germany and France? It's failing, they know that. Perhaps they're thinking that it's time to move on to the next stage of global dominance. Europe's stuck in austerity. It's going to collapse. And as it says in the treaty, they've now made deals with the IMF. Further deals with the IMF. The International Monetary Fund. Which is headquartered where? It's not headquartered in Brussels. It's not in France or Germany. It's in Washington, D.C. So personally, if I'm going to speculate on a possible bigger picture to all this, then my view is that the empire, the Anglo-American establishment, know that the EU's collapsing. Therefore, the banksters don't want to be caught up in that last bit of desperation and regulation and everything. Excuse me. They don't want to be caught up in everything that goes along with a collapse. So Cameron has pulled them out slightly from that portion of it. And when it does collapse, the bankers will be there to offer their global solution. I mean, if it's obvious to us that things aren't right, then the city know full well what's going on. And they're going to try and protect themselves before swooping back in. Demise of the euro, part of a long-term plan for global supercurrency controlled by the banksters. And this is an article from globalresearch.ca. Efforts by European leaders to shoehorn a range of diverse countries into a rigid financial cage are due to fail. But that's all part of the long-term plan for a global supercurrency which can only bring more hardship to ordinary working people. A question that more and more people are asking nowadays is, what on earth were the Europeans thinking when they agreed to have just one currency for all of Europe? In Greek mythology, Procrustes was the son of Poseidon, god of the deep blue seas. He built an iron bed of a size that suited him and then forced everybody who passed by his abode to lie on it. If the passerby was shorter than his bed, then Procrustes would stretch him, breaking bones, tendons and sinews until the victim fitted. If he was taller, then he would chop off feet and limbs until the victim was the right size. This ancient story of one size fits all seems to have made a 21st century comeback when Europeans were coaxed into imposing upon themselves an oxymoron, a blatant and conceptual contradiction they call the euro. As we said in a recent article, the euro carries an expiry date. Perhaps the Eurocrats, who were its midwives a decade ago, expected that it would live a little longer, maybe even come of age. But they certainly knew that sooner or later the euro would die, that it was meant to die. Because the euro is not an end in itself, but rather a transition, a bridge, an experiment in supranational currency earmarked for replacement by a far more ambitious and powerful global currency issued by a global central bank, controlled by a cabal of global private bankers, obeying a new world order blueprint emanating from a private global power elite. Bit of a tongue twister there. The problem today is that what impacted Europe as a financial ripple effect in 2008 has now grown into a veritable financial tsunami, threatening to swamp the whole euro system, and more big trouble lies ahead. In fact, today's euro troubles are nothing more than one of many variations of sovereignty troubles, because when a country's leaders irresponsibly cede part of their sovereignty, whether monetary, political, financial, economic, judicial or military, it had better take a really good look at what it is doing, what the implications are for the medium and long term. It goes on basically talking about the plans for a global currency, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of one way to analyse the current EU situation. Obviously that's not the end of the story. It's not over yet, obviously. There's more things to come. But hopefully the real Eurosceptics can kind of capitalise on this and push for a referendum. I know that's a rosy view of things, but maybe we will get a referendum at some point. It's possible. Anything's possible. I'm going to go to a quick song, gather my notes, and then I'll come back and talk about something called the World Policy Conference that kind of ties into some of this stuff. Sorry folks, I muted my mic during the break and I've just been talking. But anyway, welcome back to the WideShut Webcast. Yes, Cameron's veto is overhyped. The people aren't out of the EU. It's the banks, the City of London, that have been pulled out of the EU, or at least out of some of these regulations. And that's of course because Cameron works for the bankers, not the people. Why are they pulling out? Well, it could be because they know it's collapsing, don't want to be, swept up in all that, and so they can offer the global solution after it all collapses. But this isn't for the people. Cameron is not supporting the people in any of this. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the headlines. This is just Cameron giving his paymasters a helping hand. And expanding on this a bit, I guess we could call it this week's New World Order quote of the week. But on Friday, and I think over the weekend, there was a conference in Vienna tucked away nicely there without anyone knowing, called the World Policy Conference. Would their agenda be about setting world policy, since they're the World Policy Conference? Well, its founder, Thierry de Montbriol, who comes from a family of bankers, and who's a French economics and international relations specialist, he said on the About page, I'll paste the link in a minute, the World Policy Conference is the only large-scale international conference entirely devoted to the issue of global governance in all its aspects. The meeting in Vienna in December 2011 is the 4th edition. It comes at a pivotal time in history. And this is what just the first paragraph on the About page says. You can get into it yourself if you want to look more into it. But it says the world's political, economic and environmental dimensions make for a complex system, a non-linear one, i.e. the effects of upheaval are not proportional to their causes, which requires a form of governance that is both flexible and steady to prevent the system from coming apart. The methods for such a form of governance should be developed so as to be able to deal quickly with changing and often unpredictable circumstances, as is the case with any complex system. So notice how it says economic and environmental dimensions, obviously all the global collapse of the financial system, global warming and climate change, basically going, the economy's collapsing, global warming, we need global governance now. And there's a list of topics that they discussed at this World Policy Conference over the weekend. The first one is global governance and its current state, which included a speech by Stuart Patrick of the CFR's Global Governance Division. They discussed the Arab Spring and global governance. I can't exactly say what that means because there's no more details and there's hardly been any reporting on it. But the Arab Spring and global governance, does that mean different countries now have to work together to support revolutions across the world and send in our armies to help and send in our CIA agents to help foment these revolutions? Possibly. They also discussed major catastrophes and global governance, and that meeting included Jim Hoagland, who's associate editor and chief foreign correspondent of the Washington Post, and a chap named Scott Charney of Microsoft. And something that relates to the first part of the show was their discussion entitled Europe as a Laboratory for Global Governance, as a test, as a laboratory. So, could it be that, Europe was just the testing ground for the global system that they want to implement? It's a possibility. Also in attendance at this World Policy Conference was Prince Turki of the Saudi royal family, who's also the former boss of the Saudi intelligence agency, and Ehud Barak, Israel's defense minister. And this is what one reporter at the conference wrote for The Economist about these two chaps. What struck Cassandra, however, was a prediction, albeit not on the same day and face-to-face, shared by Prince Turki Al Faisal, the former boss of the Saudi intelligence agency and Saudi Arabia's former ambassador to Washington, and Ehud Barak, Israel's defense minister and former prime minister. Both men think that the regime in Syria of Assad is doomed. Neither man seems too concerned by the potential for a descent into sectarian warfare in both Syria and neighbouring Lebanon. As Barak said more than once, we live in a dangerous neighbourhood. True enough, and one danger underlined by both Turkey and Barak was Iran's quest for nuclear weapons. Ooh. Just how to stop that quest is another matter. Barak refused to be drawn on any Israel military intention, but the Saudi prince had a nice description of Iran as a paper tiger with steel claws, the claws being Iranian-supported movements such as Hezbollah. So, the Israeli defense minister and a Saudi royal and former intel officer, went on record saying Syria is doomed. I think we should take notice of that. Why do they know it's doomed? Maybe it's because them and their allies in the US are already meddling in Syria's business. According to Nizar Nayouf, who appeared on one of the Corbett Report videos recently, he's a journalist in Syria, US troops are already on the Jordan-Syria border. Foreign military groups estimated that hundreds of individuals have taken up position in the city of Al-Mafraq in northern Jordan on the Syrian border. The presence of foreign troops were also reported by a Jordanian military officer who asked to remain anonymous. He said hundreds of soldiers who speak languages other than Arabic were seen during the past 2 days, as of Sunday, moving back and forth in military vehicles between the King Hussein Air Base in Al-Mafraq, 10 kilometers from the Syrian border, and the vicinity of Jordan. At least one US aircraft carrying military personnel landed in Prince Hassan Air Base, located 100 kilometers to the east of the city of Al-Mafraq, another source reported. Well, what does the West want with Syria? Well, it's almost a cookie-cutter script right now. We've seen it all over the world. Oil is obviously on the list. Syria has some oil production. They have a lot of mineral mines, including phosphate. And it's just the same old story. Imperialism, pillaging resources and things. You know, why the West invaded any other country? Because it's what the bankers and the corporations and the military-industrial complex want. It's what they live off. Constant war. It's the empire at work. And it doesn't matter whether thousands of people are protesting in support of the Syrian government, just like the hundreds of thousands that protested in support of Gaddafi. If the West wants change, then they're going to get it, and they're going to get behind groups within the country that are against the government, and they're going to fund them, and they're going to send their people in to help overthrow these governments. That's just the way it works. It doesn't matter whether the rebels or the opposition or whoever are Al-Qaeda. If it fits the script at that time, then that's what they're going to do. Of course, the other big thing is that Syria is an ally of Iran, and Iran is another country on the warmongers list to invade. We saw the ramping up earlier in the month and in November. It seems to have died down a little bit, but we're always on the verge of invading Iran. They're just looking for the right time, the right way of doing it. And they could get to Iran through Syria, you know, taking out their allies and stuff. But here's a good article out of, well, it's a socialist website, workers.org, but that doesn't mean, you know, that doesn't mean we ignore everything that socialists write. There's common ground between all groups, really. And this is a pretty detailed and well-written article, so we'll read this. The US NATO forces, using the United Nations and the Arab League as cover, are positioning themselves for a military intervention in Syria. At the same time, they have upped their economic war on the government led by Bashar al-Assad. The scenario resembles what was done against the Libyan government before the US NATO bombardment began. This time, however, Turkey has joined the imperialist camp in applying economic pressure and letting its soil be used as a rear base for Assad opponents. This intervention has nothing to do with any repression the Assad government has visited on any people in Syria. It is not meant to save the Syrian people any more than the massive bombardment of Libya was meant to save Libyans. The goal is to make Syria an imperialist puppet and to destroy the strategic alliance it has with Hezbollah, the National Liberation Movement in Lebanon, and with Iran. This would be a major blow not just to the people of Syria, but to the whole region. Sanctions have been imposed on Syria by the US, the European Union, the Arab League countries, and Turkey. In an unprecedented move, the Arab League has even suspended the membership of Syria, home of one of the greatest Arab civilizations. In close coordination with the White House, NATO member Turkey has frozen Syria's financial assets and cut off transactions with Syria's central bank. Sanctions are meant to destroy the Syrian economy and to isolate the Assad government from its business support and the population. Money transfers into and out of Syria are blocked, and Syrians cannot use their credit cards abroad. And then it goes into how the Syrian government is being set up. Like Libya, the Syrian government is being accused of atrocities. The information these charges are based upon does not come from independent human rights organizations. As reported in the establishment Western media and Al Jazeera, this information comes from the Syrian opposition. So the evidence against Assad is his opposition. That's ridiculous. One group quoted widely, the local coordinating committees of Syria is part of the Syrian National Council, which seeks to overthrow the Assad government. Meanwhile, the US and Western European countries making the accusations against Syria are themselves guilty of decades of atrocities against the people of Iraq, Afghanistan and other countries. So yeah, basically it's a repeat of Libya. They've got the script, they're doing it all over the world, and you know, good luck to the Syrian people, because it's a sad situation, but they're going to get bombed. And we're not going to be told about it on the media. It's going to be, oh, we're going to save the people. Just like in Libya, where they bombed 30,000 people to death. Yet they still go along as if they save the people. So, there you have it, folks. Cameron's big PR stunt that does nothing for the people and everything for the City of London. Global governance looming, as always, on the horizon, with all these think tanks and conferences holding meetings about the future of global governance and so on, without actually informing the democratic people of sovereign nations that they're planning for a world government. And as always, there's more war around the corner. I wish I could end on a lighter note, but that's just kind of the facts of the situation we find ourselves in right now. So that pretty much wraps it up for me. I'll catch everybody next week. And be sure to come back in 30 minutes for Blue Bus and the Reality Check show.
If you found the preceding information valuable, please consider buying a DVD or making a small donation of your choosing. Go to wideshut.co.uk/donate. That's wideshut.co.uk/donate. You are the resistance.